Police arrested suspected kidnappers that killed Fish Magnate in Anambra State. Watch this video till the end and subscribe to my channel for more news. It started like any other quiet night in Anambra State, but for the officers at the anti-kidnapping unit, this was the night everything was set to change. 4 days, tension had gripped the entire state following the kidnapping and brutal killing of one of the state's most promising young businessmen, known to many as Fish Magnate. His death shook the people, triggered outrage, and launched one of the most intense manhunts the state police had faced in recent years. While the public mourned, the Anambra State Police Command was already deep in the shadows, working tirelessly to track down those behind the murder. Sources say that from the very moment Fish Magnate's lifeless body was discovered, the special anti-kidnapping squad kicked into action. They began to gather every traceable clue, phone call logs, CCTV footage, known gang movements, and even community whispers. Nothing was off limits. Then, the breakthrough came. A burner phone, abandoned in a vehicle believed to have been used in the abduction, gave the police their first real lead. The phone had been wiped clean, but not clean enough. Forensic analysis retrieved a fragment of a voice note and location data. That was all the officers needed. They traced the device's signal to a compound located in the outskirts of Nobi town, a place surrounded by bushes and strategically hidden behind an abandoned poultry farm. According to intelligence reports, this compound had been under discreet surveillance for about 48 hours after strange activity was noticed. Frequent late-night movements, unknown vehicles, and blackout curtains that never opened during the day. At exactly 4:30 a.m., while most of the town was still asleep, a covert police convoy moved in. 5 Hilux vans, headlights off, rolled in silently and surrounded the compound from all angles. The mission was simple: enter, apprehend, and extract, all without giving the suspects a chance to escape or destroy evidence. Using a battering ram, officers broke through the rusted metal gate. The first room was empty, but as they moved deeper into the house, they found 5 men asleep in a back room, unaware of what was about to hit them. The suspects were taken by complete surprise. There was no time to run, no time to fight back. Officers secured the premises and restrained all 5 men. No shots were fired. No struggle was recorded. It was a swift and clean operation, a textbook takedown. The house was then thoroughly searched. What officers found raised more suspicion: multiple unregistered SIM cards, several mobile phones wrapped in foil to block signals, a small bag of weapons, and a stash of cash. Most importantly, a damaged phone believed to belong to the victim, Fish Magnate, was recovered behind a cupboard panel. That discovery tightened the noose around the suspects. Immediately, the 5 men were handcuffed, blindfolded for security, and driven straight to the Anambra State Police headquarters in Awaka. They arrived at exactly 6:15 a.m. and were taken into custody for further questioning. Police sources revealed that these suspects were already known to law enforcement, some with prior links to criminal activity in neighboring states. However, this was the first time they had been connected to a murder case involving such a high-profile victim. Back at the station, the atmosphere was intense. Each of the suspects was placed in a separate interrogation room. Officers began to ask direct questions: how they knew Fish Magnate, if they were in the area on the day of his abduction, and who else might have been involved. But one after the other, they all denied any involvement. One suspect claimed he was a mechanic. Another said he was simply visiting a cousin. But investigators weren't buying their stories. The police already had enough indicators: phone tracking, digital footprints, and circumstantial evidence that placed them at the scene. Still, the denials didn't stop. Despite the seriousness of the charges, none of the 5 suspects confessed or gave away any information. Instead, they stuck to a coordinated narrative, each trying to distance themselves from the crime. But even in silence, their capture marked a major victory for the police. As officers continued gathering evidence, the suspects were formally detained. They were not granted bail. Investigators made it clear, this was just the beginning. The full story was yet to unfold, but the first big step had been taken. The arrest of these 5 men was not by chance. It was the result of strategic intelligence, technical investigation, and old-school police work. The compound where they were found is now being treated as a major crime scene, and more arrests may follow. Make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Justice for Fish Magnate is just getting started. The early morning arrest had been swift, but the real work was just beginning. By the time the 5 suspects arrived at the Anambra State Police headquarters in Awaka, the sun was just starting to rise. But inside the building, the atmosphere was far from calm. Every officer knew this was no ordinary case. Fish Magnate wasn't just another name. He was a young businessman who had risen quickly in the fish farming industry, employing people, creating opportunities, and inspiring many in Anambra. His death had left a deep scar on the community, and the police were under immense pressure to bring those responsible to justice. The suspects were separated immediately. This was standard procedure: no talking to each other, no exchanging glances, no chance to coordinate stories. Each man was placed in a small, dimly lit interrogation room, with only a table, 2 chairs, and the unwavering eyes of trained investigators. From the very first question, the pattern became clear. The first suspect, a man in his late 30s with rough hands and a scar across his cheek, stared straight ahead and said, "I don't know this man you're talking about. I was sleeping at home that day." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of nervousness when the officer placed a photo of Fish Magnate on the table. The second suspect, younger, maybe in his mid-20s, leaned back and smirked. "I'm just a trader," he said. "You people have the wrong person." But the smirk faded when the investigator slid a printout of call records across the table, showing his number communicating with another suspect on the very day of the abduction. The third suspect tried a different approach: silence. He sat there, arms crossed, refusing to say a word. But investigators knew silence could be just as telling as words. They watched him closely, noting every twitch, every deep breath, every glance toward the door. Meanwhile, in the evidence room, officers were busy examining the items recovered from the compound. The damaged phone believed to belong to Fish Magnate was being sent to a cyber forensics lab. If unlocked, it could reveal the last calls made, last messages sent, or even locations visited before his death. The multiple unregistered SIM cards were also flagged, a classic sign of criminal activity meant to avoid detection. Back in the interrogation rooms, the denials continued. The fourth suspect, sweating despite the cool air, said he had been visiting a friend in another town on the day in question. But GPS data from a motorcycle the police believed he owned placed him near the crime scene. When confronted with this, he simply shrugged and said, "That's not my bike." The fifth suspect was perhaps the calmest of all. He maintained that he had been at home with family the whole time. But when asked to provide names and numbers of people who could confirm his story, he stumbled. That hesitation told investigators all they needed to know: this alibi was paper-thin. Still, the suspects were sticking to one thing. They all denied having anything to do with Fish Magnate's death. But the police weren't letting them go. The officer in charge of the anti-kidnapping unit knew that cases like this weren't solved in one day. The suspects were officially detained for further investigation, meaning they could be held while more evidence was gathered. Outside the station, word of the arrests had already spread. Community members were hopeful but cautious. Everyone wanted justice, but they also knew criminals were skilled at hiding the truth. Some people even feared there might be others involved who were still walking free. Inside, detectives began cross-referencing the suspects' phone records, financial transactions, and travel patterns over the past 2 months. They were also reaching out to informants, some of whom had been feeding small bits of information since the investigation began. The goal was clear: build an airtight case, one that would hold up in court, one that no clever lawyer could tear apart. While the suspects sat in their cells, thinking the worst was over, investigators were just getting started. They planned to conduct voice analysis to compare with the recovered voice note from the abandoned burner phone. They also intended to run fingerprints from the compound against items found at the crime scene. The police knew they were up against seasoned operators, but they also knew time was on their side. Every hour the suspects spent in custody was another hour for the investigation to dig deeper. Do you think these suspects are truly innocent, or are they just trying to buy time? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you watch till the end. As the day ended, the suspects remained behind bars. No charges had been officially filed yet, but that was coming. The police were confident this was the beginning of the end for those responsible for Fish Magnate's death. By the time the first night fell after their arrest, the 5 suspects were still sitting in the cold cells of the Anambra State Police headquarters. Their world had shifted in just a few hours, from sleeping in a hidden compound to being at the center of one of the state's biggest murder investigations in years. They had all denied their involvement, claimed innocence, and insisted they were being framed. But for the police, those denials meant nothing without proof to back them up. This was not a random sweep. They were arrested based on intelligence, evidence, and days of surveillance. The officer in charge of the anti-kidnapping unit made it clear in a short briefing to journalists outside the station. These men are prime suspects in the kidnapping and murder of the young businessman known as Fish Magnate. They are being held for thorough investigation, and we will not rest until every single person involved in this crime is brought to justice. Inside the station, the suspects were restless. Interrogations had been intense, and the police had made it clear that more evidence was coming in by the hour. The cyber forensics team was still working on the damaged phone found at the compound, trying to recover deleted data. Early reports indicated that part of a location history log had been restored, placing the phone in the exact area where Fish Magnate was last seen alive. That alone was a major link, but the investigators wanted more. Another unit was checking the unregistered SIM cards. Calls traced from these SIMs matched the dates and times of ransom demands that had been reported to the police by Fish Magnate's family during the days he was missing. This was no coincidence, and it further tightened the case against the suspects. Meanwhile, community reaction was growing. People wanted updates. The name Fish Magnate carried weight in Anambra. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a symbol of youth success and hard work. His loss had left a wound that only justice could start to heal. The police, however, were cautious. They knew that a rushed case could fall apart in court. Every detail had to be airtight, every link to the suspects had to be solid and undeniable. That's why the men would remain in detention while the investigation continued. In the holding cells, tensions between the suspects began to show. Officers monitoring them reported that two of the men avoided eye contact with the others, choosing to sit quietly in a corner. One of them paced endlessly, muttering under his breath. The once calm, confident demeanor seen during their arrest was beginning to fade. Back in the investigation room, detectives were piecing together a timeline. When Fish Magnate was abducted. When ransom calls were made. When his phone went offline. When the suspects' movements matched the timeline. It was becoming harder and harder for the suspects' denials to hold up. Still, the police knew that arresting suspects is only half the battle. They needed cooperation from the public. They encouraged anyone with information, even something as small as spotting strange vehicles or overhearing suspicious conversations, to come forward. Anonymous tip lines were opened. The next step in the case would be critical, linking physical evidence to the suspects beyond any reasonable doubt. That meant fingerprint analysis, DNA swabs from items found in the compound, and voice comparisons from the recovered voice note on the burner phone. For the suspects, time was running out. Every hour in custody brought them closer to either being proven innocent or facing the full weight of the law. The police PRO ended the day with one statement that kept everyone alert. "We have them. They're not going anywhere. This is just the beginning. Expect more revelations in the coming days." As the night deepened over Awaka, the cells stayed locked, the evidence room stayed busy, and the investigation pressed forward with full force. The case of Fish Magnate's death was far from over, but one thing was certain: the walls were closing in on the 5 men now sitting in custody. Do you believe these suspects will finally crack under pressure and confess, or will the police have to build the case without their cooperation? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next update. Justice for Fish Magnate is coming, and when it does, you'll hear it here first.